You're listening to the third season of the Ministry Mind Leadership Podcast with me, your host, Kim Cooper. Each episode, we will speak with leaders from across Canada with the purpose of bringing connection, engagement, and encouragement. We hope these episodes will challenge and equip you along your ministry journey. Welcome to Ministry Mind Podcast. Today, I am excited and really looking forward to a conversation with Gary Chupik. And so Gary and I are going to cover a topic of how to become a high impact leader. And this is Gary's life. He's coaching and doing lots of awesome things. So we're going to get to know you a little bit better today, Gary. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So first of all, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Gary? Tell us, where'd you grow up? Where do you live now? Tell us a little bit about your family, what you do.
Yeah, well, I just consider myself a prairie boy. I was born in Regina, Saskatchewan, and that's my heritage, and was there last week. And every time I drive around Regina, I'm like, this is my hood. Like, this is where I grew up. I presently live in Seattle, Washington, and I travel a lot. That's just part of what I do professionally. And in terms of kind of like what I do presently, I own a couple of businesses. Well, essentially one, but it's called Elite Mindset. And I do a lot of performance coaching with professional teams and athletes. And so I get to do that also in the world of business. And that's kind of an interesting sort of blossoming industry where we're taking sports mental training into the business world. And so there's a lot of applicable sort of principles that you can apply for the business world. So yeah, I'm a dual citizen. I tell people I'm bi, but you really, what I mean is I'm dual citizen. And so I really enjoy going back and forth from the United States to Canada often.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I had heard that you were in Canada, in Regina. I was watching your posts. That's fantastic. And tell us a little bit about your family too.
Yeah, so I am married to my wife, Molly, for 32 years, and we met each other in Eston, believe it or not, your neck of the woods.
Yeah.
And so love brought me south of the border. And so we have three kids, Josiah, Zachary, and Sarah. And we're just on the verge of being empty nesters. My youngest daughter, Sarah, is engaged to be married this summer. So that's kind of a big deal.
That is a big deal. How are you feeling about that, Dad?
Well, if you love the guy, everything is fine. And so we really love this young man. He's a
Oh,
great guy, and we're fully confident in him. And actually, what's interesting about that is that they had a family friend who was their pastor of their family church where they were attending for many years. And so that pastor mentored this young man named Isaac. And so, but what's interesting about it is that Mark, the pastor of this church, was also one of my mentors when I first came to Seattle. So he mentored both of us. And so he speaks, I think, well of both of us and was kind of bragging on each other. So yeah, it's just, we're just totally thrilled. And yeah, we couldn't be more excited for my daughter.
cool. What a neat stage of life. So cool. So as a leader, what fills your tank? What do you do? Do you have hobbies or things that you do in your downtime?
Yeah, I tell people I like to smoke, but I like to actually smoke meat. So that's kind of my midlife crisis, is buying a smoker. So I've smoked just about everything you can possibly think of, and so I'm an avid smoker. Love to enter competitions with my smoking meat. Yeah, there's a bunch in Washington and the Pacific Northwest. So I'm competitive. Like to be a competitive smoker. I enjoy all the different kinds of sports. There's nothing, I haven't met a sport that I haven't liked. And so I'm really just sort of into the drama of sports and competition. I also love technology, and I'm really into AI and sort of all the new AI stuff and how it's affecting our world. And I love cryptocurrency. So I like to invest in cryptocurrency and know just enough to be dangerous, but that's love to invest in cryptocurrency.
Wow. Those are some diverse interests.
Yeah, I think so. I think sort of being on the cutting edge of culture, I think AI and cryptocurrencies are kind of the two topics that are kind of front and center. And so
smoking meat.
Yeah, I really love to explore and think about the implications and how does
Right.
that affect life and culture and church. And so there's a lot of, for example, my daughter works at PushPay, which is a tithing app where people can tithe at their church just on their apps.
She
But
works.
yeah. And so
Wow.
now they're adding cryptocurrency as a way to tithe.
Really? Wow. That is so so interesting. Very cool. I had no idea. That's pretty cutting edge.
Well, what's pretty interesting about it is that it's not really coming out of a bank account. Its
Right.
worth has value, like Bitcoin has value and Ethereum has value. But if somebody wants to give out of the sort of the overflow of their income
Yep.
give out of one of their investments, then they don't feel like it's coming out of their pocket, but they're giving out of the overflow. And so there's a great opportunity for people to
Yeah.
receive Bitcoin.
Absolutely. I love it. That's very cool. And like I've been doing a lot of reading about just streams of income and stuff.
Mhm.
Like that's tapping right into it. I'm reading a book called New Wave right
Cool.
now. And yep, that's right on par for exactly what we were talking about. So you come from ministry experience, a background in ministry, and you've kind of weaved your way into a bit of a different path. Tell us how your ministry experience led you to where you are now.
Yeah, it's been a little bit of an interesting road. I don't think I would have chosen it to do what I do. You know, I've been sort of a hesitant, reluctant leader most of my life. And so I just never viewed myself like when I went to Bible college, there was like this equator on the earth, right? And it was like the people above the equator were destined for full-time ministry. And those of us who were below the equator, well, we were just going to support the ones above the equator. And so I
Yeah.
didn't really view myself as an above the equator kind of a guy. But I always knew that there was a calling on my life. I just wasn't sure how to express it. And so when my wife and I got married here in Seattle, I ended up being the youth pastor at Trevor Harris's church, my wife's home church. And
Mhm.
so I just began my journey that way. But I remember thinking very explicitly, I do not want to work in a church. I do not want to be a pastor. And so it took Trevor asking me, I think 4 times, whether I wanted to become the youth pastor. And the previous 3, I had said, no, thanks. I appreciate the offer. But on the 4th time, my mother-in-law, who just passed away recently, she took me on a walk in the parking lot on a Sunday summer afternoon. And she said, Handsome, let's go for a walk. And so she walked me around the parking lot and said, you should give this ministry thing a try. And
Yep.
so I thought, I mean, I love kids. I love teenagers. I love young adults. And so I decided to give it a try. So I was there for 4.5 years
Wow.
and definitely felt like, yeah, the local church wasn't my thing,
Right.
but what else could I do? And so I did that for 4.5 years and then did some professional chaplaincy at Veterans Hospital and then realized I needed to get my master's degree. So I went to get my master's degree at Fuller Seminary, not because I wanted to be a pastor, but because I wanted to be a professional chaplain, of
Mhm.
which a master's degree was necessary.
Right.
But about 3/4 of the way through that education, my degree, the Lord just spoke so deeply to my heart and my wife's heart and said, Gary, I want you involved in the local church. And
Mm.
so it was really clear. It was just incredibly clear to us. And so the last semester of my MDiv, I started looking for churches and ended up in Salem, Oregon for about 6 years, 6.5 years, doing associate ministry stuff, associate pastor. And
Mhm.
then, but the first 2 weeks that I was at that church, the senior pastor looked at me and he said, You're not going to be here long. And I was like, wait, what? You're going to fire me already? And he said, No, you're going to plant a church one day. And I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Like, that is so far off my radar. And but he just kind of planted the seed and it sort of laid dormant for about 5 years. And then I started dreaming at night about planting a church. And it was
Nice.
against my own will. So I just had these reoccurring dreams and I would wake up angry. I didn't even tell my wife. So over time, it was so repetitive that I ended up saying to Molly, like one night in bed, I said, Sweetie, she goes, What? The lights are off, the kids are down. I'm like, I think God wants us to plant a church. And she was kind of quiet. And she said, I think that's a wonderful idea.
Really?
So, I did not want to plant a church, literally did not want to plant a church, like
Yeah.
so against it, but I couldn't shake the feeling inside of me. So I had a church planting assessment and they said, you should plant a church. I had another church plant. Usually you only do one church planting assessment,
Yeah,
maybe two at the
yeah.
most. I did two. They said you should plant a church. I did another one with another organization. So three organizations. They said you should plant a church. And then I did a fourth one just because I'm crazy. And I'm like a doctor. I going to the doctor and getting a second opinion. I just had a third opinion and a fourth opinion and a fifth. I had 5 church planting assessments, believe it or not.
Seriously.
Seriously. That's how much I didn't want to plant a church. So after that fifth one, I thought, okay, like this is a big deal now. And so I was still hesitant, but my wife said to me, Gary, I think why you're hesitant is because you don't want to put the pressure and you understand the sacrifice of ministry on family. And
Yeah.
I said, I think you're right. I know it's a big deal.
Yeah.
And to make this sacrifice and commitment. And she said, you know what? She said, Gary, she says, you be obedient to God. You let us respond to God in all of it.
Wow.
And so that kind of set me free, I think, to plant. And so I planted a church here in Seattle for 9 years in a suburb of Seattle. And during that time, I became the national director of church planting for the ACOP and did a lot of regional stuff with the SBC, Southern Baptist Convention here in the Pacific Northwest. And I was planting a church. I was doing church planting for the ACOP. I was doing church planting for this group here, church planting for another group, and I just ran out of gas. I just mismanaged myself. And I just kind of hit a brick wall emotionally and spiritually and psychologically. And I hit that brick wall and I knew I couldn't go back to a local church. And so I had a couple offers to do church planting stuff nationally. And so I did get one offer and then I took the offer, but then they reneged to about 2 weeks after I accepted and after I had resigned from my church. And so
Oh,
it
wow.
was a really odd situation. And so that began like my midlife crisis. Like, now what do I do with my life? So, associate pastor, youth pastor, chaplain, church planting, was just kind of in my past. And, there's a lot of, I call each of those classrooms. Like sometimes we don't get to choose our classroom. God just puts us in the class
Mhm.
and our job is to pass the test, like pass the
Right.
class. And so I just felt like no matter where I was planted, I wanted to pass the test. And so
Mhm.
so that kind of brought me to a stage of my life where I was just saying, God, what's next? Like, I don't have the energy for anything, but I do need to begin asking what's next.
Wow. Okay, so a couple things that I'm hearing from you that I feel are so relevant to our young leaders is you were a hesitant, reluctant leader. I mean, how many of us started out that way? Like, no, I'll do this, but not this. Or
Yeah.
like say, I'll nevers, the I'll nevers. You never say that to God because
Yeah.
you just don't know.
Totally true.
The other thing that sticks out to me from your story is that we think we know the pathway or the destination or how we might get to the destination, and God always has so many different forks in the road that we did not see coming. And it's so neat to look back and look at. And then the third thing I wrote down was the classrooms of life.
Mhm.
You went and did your master's, but so much of the classroom of life, the different areas that you served in, walked in, the things that you did have led you to really unique place of ministry and work now. So what do you love most about what you're doing now? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting. I went from life being incredibly difficult for the past 20, 26 or 27 years. Like, like you're always feeling like, you're walking uphill and into the wind, like everything's a grind, everything takes effort and inertia. And I went from that. And I remember, I'll never forget it. I was in Toronto at an ACOP conference and Rod Barks said, hey, Gary, let's go for a walk. So we went on this walk. I'll never forget it. And Rod Barks, it was like at one of the low points. I was like in that in-between job stage. And he just said, Gary, my prayer for you, you can just hear his voice, right?
Yes.
Gary, my prayer for you is that one day you'll walk with a spring in your step again.
Hmm.
And I remember saying to him, I have no idea what that's like. I don't know what it's like to be happy. I don't know what it's like to be content. I actually don't even know what that even feels like or even could look like. And he said,
Wow.
he goes, I just trust God for that for you. And I'm like, okay, one day I hope I can walk with a spring in my step again. And so I think looking back over my journey, I just never thought I could do something and be happy. And
Hmm.
so now I look at my life and the things that I get to do. I don't think I could be happier.
Wow.
I really don't. Molly asked me the other day, she goes, what is like, you're living your dream, aren't you? And I'm like, totally. Every single day, I'm living out my fantasy. And so
Wow.
it's just this 180-degree turn into I love everything I do and the opportunities that I get. And really, what I'm talking about specifically is that I get to I get I get to help God transform lives every single day, like
Cool.
every day.
Yeah.
And the difference between kind of what I do now and being involved in ministry is when you're in ministry, not everybody that you serve is hungry.
Yeah.
They're not hungry for the Lord. They're not hungry to change. They're not desperate. And what I do now is maybe it's because people pay me a lot of money, but
Right.
it's helpful to work with people who want to be helped.
Yeah.
And so my eyes are kind of always peeled for, okay, who really is desperate for God? Who's really desperate to learn and who's desperate to like it's important that they change. Whereas a lot of times in ministry, it's like people kind of shrug their shoulders, right? And they just create fires instead of, I mean, it's just like they're bored, like people are bored in church. Um, yeah, I just absolutely love to be instrumental in changing people's lives. So in my job, I get to unlock people.
Cool.
This is the best way for me to describe it. I get to unlock people and I get to unleash them on the world. And the way that I do that is I have something called the game plan for life, which you might be a little bit familiar with because of Greg. But
Yep.
the game plan for life is instrumental. I've changed it since him and I worked together, but
Yep.
um, the game plan for life, and then I do mental performance coaching. So I work with professional college teams and athletes
Right.
and people in business. So I get to what I say is I get to help people have a playbook for their mind and a
Yep.
game plan for their life. And so I don't teach people what to think. I actually teach them how to think. And
Yeah.
so to have people sort of lift up the hood of their car, of their life, their engine, and take a peek at it and say, well, let's dissect this. And then to help them sort of kind of navigate what the next stage of their life looks like or how to optimize their life. It's just the best job in the world. Are you kidding me?
Oh, cool.
So it couldn't be more fulfilling and more fruitful and more like having a generational impact
Yeah.
than that. And I think it's predicated on, and I think most people in ministry get this wrong. It's when people tell me that they are called to a church, I just kind of shake my head. I'm like, you're never called to a church. Ever,
Yeah.
ever. You have a calling on your life and you have assignments that God gives you.
Yeah.
So the calling stays the same, but the assignments change. And our job is to be obedient when the assignment changes. And sometimes we know in advance and sometimes we don't. But the calling stays the same. So, for example, the Apostle Paul, he was the apostle to the Jews and he was to proclaim the gospel. And so much so that even in the book of Corinthians, Paul says, hey, I didn't come to baptize. I came to preach the gospel. And I'm thinking to myself, you should give this baptism thing a chance, Paul, because you don't get beat, you're not naked, you're not stripped out. Like it's not happy when you proclaim the gospel, right?
Yeah.
And if you baptize, you get to be in the water, you get to high five, you get to hug.
Yeah.
But this whole proclaiming thing is tough work. And so much so that I can't remember in Acts 6 or 7, he goes into the city. I think it might have been Lystra, and he gets beaten to a pulp and he gets drug out for preaching the gospel. He gets drug
Yeah.
out by his friends and they think he's dead, like literally dead. And the Bible says that they prayed over him when they realized that he was kind of coming to.
Yeah.
And what does he do the next day? He goes back into the city and proclaims the gospel. Like, you got to be nuts to do that. You have to have a calling on your life that you're so sure about that nothing stops you. And that's the example that Paul leaves for us. And so for you and I, it's like, And for people in ministry, it's like, what's your calling?
Mhm.
And how are you fulfilling that? I mean, your calling is different than your assignment. So you can fulfill your calling in lots of different places, doing lots of different things. But I think especially for our young leaders, it's like, listen, you don't have to work inside the four walls of a church to be called to ministry. You
Yeah.
just don't.
Yeah.
You are going to be judged, I think, according to your faithfulness to the calling that God had on your life. So go be faithful to that. And what it looks like, I don't know, just go have fun. Like, go
Yeah.
have fun, whatever that is. Go have as much fun as possible, because that way you can project the love and the grace and the mercy and the joy of Christ in your life.
Absolutely. I love that. We all have a calling, but the assignments change.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's good. And I'm just giggling as I'm hearing you talk about like the difference between what you do now and ministry. And I think so many times it's like sneak attack transformation. People don't know that we're trying to help them
Yeah,
transform, or we're like dragging them kicking and screaming. They don't really want transformation. Where this way, people are actively looking for and inviting you in to help
mhm.
them see transformation happen in their lives so that they can be um, maximizing their calling to the fullest. That's
Agreed.
that's brilliant. So, what are the high impact habits you would recommend to the leaders listening today? What are some of those, like, and obviously this is your business, this is your bread and butter, this is what you do, but I think for people to have a snippet, a little understanding of exactly what some of those things are that you would encourage leaders to do so that they can be high impact, what would be some of those that you would share?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's such a fantastic question that we just kind of brush over often.
Yep.
But, I mean, listen, you and I are the treasure. Like, I know it sounds sort of arrogant to say that, but God treasures us and he created us, he made us. And so our first job, I don't care what you do, what your, vocation is, your first job is to not only take care of yourself, but take exceptional care of yourself, because that is an act of worship to God, to take care
Mhm.
of yourself. I call it the S.F.O principle. It's take care of yourself so that you can really love and care for others, self for others. So when you're at your very best, like when you are at peak performance, you're probably the biggest blessing to the people around you. If you get 2 hours sleep, I don't know about you, Kim, but I'm not very friendly, emotionally regulated. I'm not very multi-layered thinking. I'm not very kind. I'm not, I'm just not a lot of things.
Yeah.
But when I'm honoring God with my sleep, when I'm honoring God like in every area of my life, I call it whole life excellence. Like if I can just be at peak performance at every single relationship, every little single thing that I do,
Mhm.
I'm at my best use for God to use me. It's optimal. And so for me, a leader taking care of themselves is job A1. It's not, we think that we're loving God by sacrificing all these things that we should be doing to take care of ourselves so that we can serve other people, but it's at a lower level. And so when we're at peak performance, man, we are so much more willing and able to listen to the Holy Spirit. We're
Yeah.
so much more willing to think multi-layered about what we do. We're just like much more pliable in the hands of God. And so I think the job A1 is to take exceptional, not average, not good, but exceptional care of ourselves. And here's how I do it. So I taught this to the Houston Texans football team of the NFL. So what we want to do is do something called win the day. And so everybody has a few things in their day and everyone's uniquely wired, you
Mhm.
know, and you have to figure out what puts you in prime position,
Right.
so that you feel full of God and full of life every single day. So for some people, it might be listening to 30 minutes of worship. We're listening to worship at some point during the day. That's their quiet time, And so if that's what it is, then you should do that because that's a gift. It's a grace that God has given you to connect with him. And so
Yeah.
these graces are different for everybody, but we can use them to connect with God and with people. And so I like to say either pick 5 or 7 things, no more than 7, but pick 5 or 7, not 6, but 5 or 7. And when you do these 5 or 7 things every single day, it puts you in the best position to be optimally used by God. And so they become your priority. And I call this having an internal locus of control, or an LOC, like an internal locus of control. So
Mhm.
when we can control the metrics by which we have a successful day, if we can control the metrics, and those metrics are things that we can do with ourselves, we have control over our bodies and our minds. So when we do these things, we are of the best use to the people around us, but it starts with us.
Mhm.
So we can determine whether we're having a good day or not. So I remember walking on a football field one day, and one of the trainers said to me, like, I said, how's your day? And she said, I'm having a bad day, a bad week, actually. And she said, then she looked at me and said the strangest thing. She said, why am I having a bad day? I'm like, how in the world would I know why you're having, I've just the first time I talked to you all day or all week. So she's saying, why am I having a bad day and a bad week? And so I was like, okay, what am I going to say? So I said something, I blurted something without thinking, but in hindsight, it was really good, which was because you chose to be vulnerable.
Mm.
You chose to be vulnerable to the external circumstances of your day and week, and therefore your life is a roller coaster.
Yeah.
And that's having an external locus of control. So when we have an internal locus of control, so we get to decide what makes us have a successful day, then you win every day. And
Right.
so I say 5 or 7 things, because if you have 5 things, listen, like you win 3-2, you do 3 of those things, you win 3-2. You only do 1 of those things, you lose 4-1. And so you keep track, or I keep track on a calendar of my wins and losses every single day. And those things are priority A1, and it puts me in the best position to have a successful day, to be used by God. So to me, these things, and self-care, is an act of worship, because God created us this way. So they're graces.
Mhm. Yeah. Give me an example of some of the things that you do. What are some of those that you start your day? You're talking when we first were saying hello this morning, or this afternoon, some of those things you stack your day at the beginning. What are some
Yeah,
of those
so I
things?
call it front loading.
Yeah.
Yeah, like they're front loading. So your brain literally is like a hard drive,
Yeah.
and you get to load the programs every morning when you wake up. So it's like your brain defrags every single night. No, like the current generation probably doesn't understand defragging, but because that's an old school thing. But your brain, I mean, I think computers still defrag if they have a hard drive, but your brain defrags, so it lets go of all the information that's kind of useless, and it holds on to the really important stuff. Well, it's the same thing every day when you wake up. You get to load the programs. Your brain defrags and you load the programs. And so every day, I choose not to look at my social media or my phone or pretty much anything when I first wake up, because if I do that, I'm teaching myself to live a reactive life. So I'm
Yeah.
reacting to comments, or I'm reacting to what people had to say, or an email, or social media post. I'm literally reinforcing something negative or toxic in my life. So
Yeah.
you leave the phone down, you don't pick it up, you get up. And so for me personally, going to the gym is number 1, like moving, right? Just moving. I say just move. That's number 1. Number 2 is I have a personal declaration that I make. So I have a personal philosophy and declarations that I make every day that are an important part of my day. I make sure that I have quiet time with Jesus. I also have what I call blue sky time. So that's
Okay.
time for me to dream. I'm a dreamer. So I need time to dream. Instead of judging myself, I just accept it and say, I guess I'm a dreamer. I guess I am. So why not let myself dream? But it inspires me to do things that other people won't do or don't do.
Right.
It makes me take risks. It makes me do shameless asks. It does crazy, mysterious, but fun things. So I make sure that I leave time in my day for that. And then my eating is another thing. My sleeping is another thing. And so, yeah, and then making sure that I'm living out my personal philosophy, which is every day is a new day to challenge and inspire myself and others. So those are my 7 things. And I just make sure that I win every single day doing that. So if I have a bad day externally, I'm really good on the inside, because I've done everything that prepares me for those moments.
Yeah, I love the idea of, and for myself, I've had this personal mantra of word before world. And
Mm,
so trying to get myself into the word of God first before
yeah.
I pick up my phone and look at the
Yep.
social media feed, the news feed, whatever that is. And then, yeah, that movement thing, even if it's just going out for a walk with my dog in nature and just watching the sunrise.
Yeah,
And
that's so good.
that's
Like,
transformational.
yeah, it is. Like I tell athletes and high performers all the time, information is like calories. If you take in too much information, even if it's good, if
Yeah.
you take in too much information or too many calories, then what does that do to your body, and what does that do to your mind? Well, it weighs you down, right? You become lethargic and you don't really want to move that much because you're not expending what you're taking in, those
Yeah.
calories. So only take in what you can expend. And so sometimes I have to like really limit myself and what kind of information I take in.
Yeah.
And I just say, I just, that just weighs me down. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, it might be good information, but it weighs me down.
Oh, for sure. And especially so I see clients on a weekly basis as well. And it's always interesting to me. There's a certain generation that still is very much entrenched in watching the news, like having the news on while they're having supper or whatever. And I remember as a kid, that was very normal, happened, like that was a normal thing in our family as well. That's something that I purposefully do not engage in because I get so hyper focused on the negative then.
Yeah.
And so I'll have clients come sit in my chair and after they leave, I'm like, oh, like I need to go have like a mental detox because I feel like the world is ending rapidly and we're gonna and it's just this crazy spiral. And I'm like, how does this person live like this daily?
I know.
So
I worked for a company in Vegas in the last 6 months, and the lead guy hired me to do some coaching with him. He's the owner of the luxury real estate company, and so I spent some time with him. But I did just a day of just driving around with him to his different properties, and I was just blown away by the fact that he didn't really know what was going on in the world,
right.
which was totally fascinating. I was like, huh, like he doesn't really know a lot. And he probably skims the headlines, but for about a minute, and that's it. Like that's it. But I was just really enthralled with how consumed he was with being successful and being useful in his business. I was like, wow, like that's powerful. I need to like watch this guy. I need to be around this guy more and more. And so we were just kind of rubbing off on each other in really good ways. And so, yeah, that's really true. It's like what I found recently, I'm reading a book called Training Camp by John Gordon. I'm really struck by the fact that, the most successful people will really know what they want. And that's no small thing. Like they really know what they want. And what I find is that most people who are not successful are unsure of what they want. There's like this common denominator. The successful people know what they want, and unsuccessful people don't know what they want. And that not knowing what you want causes hesitancy. It causes you to sort of be paralyzed and not make decisions. And the ones that you do make are timid, and so the successful people, they figure out what they want and they just go for it. And I think you can do that by faith. Like you can really live that way by faith. And so if you're wrong, hey, listen, God's big enough to course correct. It's okay. Like it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So you have this unique dichotomy in your life where you have this strong ministry experience and you've got these really wonderful habits and functions and things that you're doing to create success for yourself and see success for others. My next question for you is, how do you help churches, boards, pastors to use some of these things, strategize and mobilize their churches to be healthy and effective?
Yeah, that's really good. I mean, it's hard to have a healthy church without healthy leaders. And
Yeah.
so the focus really is always on the pastor and his wife and his family, and then other key leaders in the church. And so I don't know if I think we kind of gloss over that sometimes, or pastors will take fairly good care of themselves. But the leaders of the church don't take great care of themselves. Like there's not an sort of a pressure to really take care of yourself and be healthy. And so we just feel like, well, that's a task. I serve on a board or I serve at the church. Yeah, but are you being all that you can be? And so I think the investment, I think the idea of pastors inviting their key leaders into a learning journey and a healthy journey with them is one of the best things that we can do to have a healthy church. And so I think that's something that every church can benefit from, is investing in themselves in healthy ways. And I would say kind of like close second is just like people have personalities, churches have personalities too. And I don't know about your personality, but I got lots of weaknesses in my personality. I got lots of problems. I got lots of issues. I got things that I'm wrestling with that I think other people aren't wrestling with. And I think I should be further along than I am, and all kinds of things. But when a church embraces its personality and realizes that they don't have to be like Rick Warren's church or Craig Goshel's church or somebody else, Stephen Furtick's church or whatever, like that stuff is, to me, it's so distracting, and it so takes us away from God wanting to speak to our church and us respond to what God is doing in our church. And I think a lot of, I mean, this is just, I'm going to make it real. Like, I just think a lot of pastors use their congregations to fulfill their spiritual fantasies.
Right.
And so they'll use the congregation and the gathering to sort of paint an image of what they think church should be and what they want it to be like, instead of, why don't you put down all the books? Why don't you stop reading? Like, because they're calories, right? It's weighing you down. It's causing you to be indecisive about who you are. Why don't you put all that stuff down and really just say, okay, who are we? And I think that's how I help churches. When I do work with churches, it's like, who are you? Like, your church has a personality just like you do. So why try and be all things to all people when in reality you have a very distinct calling? Just like in Revelations and the 7 churches of Revelation, they all had specific, unique things about their calling as a congregation. So go figure that out. And when you figure that out, don't apologize for not baptizing people. Like, I think church should baptize people. Don't get me wrong, but like, go figure you out and don't apologize for it. It's just your unique contribution to the community. So you go figure you out and do it really well.
I love it. It's so good. And I think this is in so many areas of life, but comparison is the thief of all joy.
Yep.
So when we continue to compare ourselves, whether that's our personal selves, the way that we look, the way that we act, or whether it's our church, our success, our call, whatever it is, if we're comparing, we're losing out.
Yeah. I'm really weak in this area because I'm very competitive. And so I realize that I'm like, that's one way the enemy just kind of puts a pebble in my shoe. And I struggle with comparison. So what I decided was, and I don't know if this is, I don't know if I'm doing it right, but I just stopped following everybody that I'm jealous of.
Yep.
You know, I mean, seriously, like, I don't need the mental gymnastics necessary. I mean, I've tried to do it and have a right heart posture. And I just had to say, Lord, I'm deleting this person. God bless them. You know, do your work in me, make me humble, you know, but I can't, it just distracts me from your calling and my obedience to where I am now. So I just had to stop following people. It's got me in trouble. Like, I've lost opportunities because I don't follow people or I don't know what's going on. But I think I'm gaining so much more in me being me, you know, and letting the chips fall where they may.
Yeah. You're not losing out, I don't think, on what God has for you. You're losing out on worrying that you didn't have something that was meant for someone else.
Yep.
I love that too, because I'm similar. Like, I'm an Enneagram 3, so I'm an achiever, and I want everything to look like it's, you know, moving along, and that's definitely one of the pitfalls for me too. And so I have been known to do that as well. But also then trying to learn in the midst of being a competitive achiever to celebrate other people's wins and stay in my lane and love my lane for what it is. And that when you can start to do that, oh man, the relationships and the fun that you can have with people, watching them succeed in their own lane is fantastic. Yeah.
Oh, it's beautiful. And there's a lot of wisdom that and a lot of battles from which that came, just for you to even say that, right?
Yep.
Like there's a lot of wisdom in that, and I wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah. So I believe that a big part of leadership is influence. And I think as we grow and as we learn and we gain experience, we also gain influence. So how can leaders better use their influence to bring change to their churches and their organization? Does
Hmm.
that resonate, that statement resonate with you? And how would you encourage leaders to do that?
Yeah, it really does resonate with me, because there was a stage of my leadership in churches, being a pastor, being a lead pastor, where, I just kind of wanted to protect people from the hard stuff of ministry. Like if people knew the underbelly of ministry, sometimes they might, it's kind of like what's in your sausage. And so I spent a lot of time managing people's emotions, managing people's opinions, and it was so crushing to me. Like it was not okay. um and so I remember reading in I don't remember, there's some passage where Paul is talking, and Paul, I think, had enough, and he says, hey, listen, I told you all the things that I struggle with. I stress out about the churches that I've started. Like, don't you remember that passage where he's like, I worry about these churches every day. Like, I don't know if they're going to make it. Like, so he's literally expressing the inner part of who he is to the people that he's leading. And it takes a lot of vulnerability to do that. And so I think number one, it's like, learn to be brutally vulnerable. I remember one of my congregants was kind of, the guy that's sort of a pain in the butt. He's just kind of like, he's always a thorn in my side. And now I have got his voice in my head, and it's taking up real estate. And when I go to bed, I'm hearing his voice. When I'm hearing a sermon, I'm hearing his voice. And I'm just like that
We'll have
critical.
one.
Oh yeah. And I remember, so we went out for breakfast one day, and so he's venting about something, right? And I said to him, I said, so what's it like to have a pastor that's very disappointing to you?
Did you want to hear his answer?
Yeah. And he said, well, it's hard, man, it's hard. I'm like, yeah, but what's it like to have someone that perpetually disappoints you as a leader? And I just kind of turned it back on him. Like, this was between him and God, and I'm an imperfect leader. And I think being vulnerable is really important as a leader, because I think it does the exact opposite of what we think it will do. That people will, maybe point a finger at us or know something about us that they shouldn't know. Or, I mean, we're human. We're really human. We're probably exceptionally human as pastors. We're
Yeah.
self-protective, and we're people pleasers, and we think we can control things, and I mean, all of that stuff. And so I think number one is being more vulnerable. Like, Paul's a good example. Like, be vulnerable. Like, share the struggle with the people that you lead. And
Right.
I think that's a good thing. Number two, I think, is to ask better questions. I think there's a tendency when we're talking about leadership, we tend to think that it's me making statements, but it's not that. It's not making statements about what we know or what we think. It really is asking better questions. And so if we can become better or even experts at asking questions, we actually will achieve the influence we're looking for, just in a different way. So I think it reflects our diversity and our empathy. I think it reflects our humility to ask what other people think about things, and that there's a different way that we can turn this diamond so we can see a different angle. I think it just shows a lot of humility and leadership to ask better questions. And then
Mhm.
finally, I would say, learn to tell the truth,
Mm.
which is part of that vulnerability thing.
Right.
But I've noticed when I've sat in boardrooms or with CEOs and business owners, both in the secular and nonprofit world and church world, the person who has the title isn't the leader. Well, they may be the leader in title, but
Yeah.
I can tell you who has the influence in the room. Almost always, it's the person who tells the truth in a gentle way.
Yep.
So telling the truth is actually one of the very best things that we can do. So if things aren't going well, just say it. hey, this didn't work or this is not going well. But just the fact that we're able to verbalize what is reality, I think really puts us in a position of influence. And so it's funny being in a room of really a lot of high level leaders. They will say something like somebody will say something, and the leader, like the leader by title, will say something, but everyone kind of looks at the other person who tells
Waiting.
the truth, right? You're like, I wonder what this truth teller was going to say. So I think
You're
telling the
reading my
truth.
book. You're reading my mail.
So anyway, I think
Uh-huh.
those three things are pretty big deals when it comes to
Yeah.
being influential leaders.
Yeah. I actually, you had mentioned Rod Barks earlier, and I had just finished doing a podcast with him, and we were talking about the difference between managing and leading. And I think exactly the answers that you just gave, if we're leaning into those three things, we're leading. Otherwise, we're just managing. And the
Yeah,
difference that he said was managing is maintaining the status quo. Leading is pushing forward and achieving change. And I think we do that. We lead by leaning into being truth tellers, being vulnerable, saying things in a kind and gentle way that need to be said, and leveraging that influence through that. So, yeah, for
it's
sure.
so good.
So then my last question as we finish up this interview, um, I wanted to ask you, how does a leader lean into their gifts to impact their ministry and their teams in a greater way?
Hmm. Oh, that's a good question. Well, I have a couple thoughts just off the top of my head. Number one is don't be afraid to be who you are. I know that sounds kind of crazy. Like in sports, we say, like be where your feet are, like be fully
Right.
present, right? And so I think there's an admission, at least for me, and this is actually quite hard for me to admit, is I'm just not good at so many things. But I can lead out of that sort of that sense of like what I'm not versus what I am. And
Right.
so God didn't gift me with every gift, he didn't make me every tool in the tool chest, right? He made
Right.
me a hammer, or a screwdriver or a saw. And it's easy to look at other people's gifts and tools and say, well, I wish I had a little bit more of that or a little bit more of this. But anytime, like in church planting, we used to have this joke, like, you're always moving, equipment from room to room. And anytime you use any piece of equipment not for its intended use, you break it.
Huh. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, just about anything. When you don't use it for its intended use, you kind of break it. And
Mhm.
so I think when it comes to leaders, if we were less sensitive about our criticisms and more in love with Jesus and the way that he created us, and to be thankful for ourselves as opposed to like, well, you kind of messed up on me, God, or you didn't give me enough of some liquid in this cup, I
Right.
what if you just sort of like fully embraced, fully surrendered, fully accepted that you're limited and that you actually don't have, I mean, leadership is to me is nothing more than like literally leadership is nothing more than intimacy with God.
Yep.
That's what it is, because let's face it, God could always pick somebody else to lead. He
Yeah.
doesn't need us. And
Nope.
so what leadership is being placed in lots of impossible situations for which there are no answers, right? Like you're just like, I don't know what to do, but you're placed in those situations so that you'll hit your knees. And in the process of hitting your knees, you'll understand a little bit more about who God is and what he wants. And so it just takes this amazing humility to be able to hit your knees and say, God, I'm just lost. I have no idea how to lead my way out of this adversity or challenge. And so when we think ourselves as like chosen by God to lead, it's not that big of a deal. It just really isn't, because God can get somebody else to lead. So therefore, your job is to remain as humble as possible and seek God for answers, for which really, humanly speaking, there aren't any answers. But he chose you because he loves you. And he wanted you to come to your wits' end about your limitations so that you'll cry out to him. And somehow that humility and that contriteness is attractive to God.
Yeah. Yeah. As you're talking about that, the first thing that comes to my mind is parenting.
Mm,
Parenting has brought me to that point so many times where you come to the end of yourself and you're just like, God, I don't know why you chose me to raise this child.
Yeah.
You could have picked so many different, more qualified, whatever the list goes on, right? You just
Hmm.
come to the end of your own abilities and there's space for God. And you
Hmm.
just submit yourself and your child to the Lord and just ask that He would give you the grace and the wisdom and the perseverance to continue on. And I think as leaders, we can take that to the bank because it's not about us. It's about just surrendering what we do have and the invitation to ministry that has been extended to us by the Lord. We get to partner with Him. And yeah, you're right. He could use so many other different people that would be, in our minds, better, but that's not what it's about.
Hmm. Yeah, you think about Moses, right? In fact, I'll finish the story about Moses in a second. I had a client that I met in Phoenix. He was a kind of like a TV personality, and he was in Phoenix, and he's a believer. And I don't know if he's going to listen to this podcast or not, but I asked him. I said, "What's more important, being used by God or being close to God?"
Hmm.
And he said, "I think being used by God." And I was like, "How would you feel if I told you that was totally wrong?"
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I look at the life of Moses, right? Moses is doing all these things for God. But what God really wants from Moses is for him to come to the tent of meeting so they can have communion together. And
Yeah.
I think, man, like if leadership isn't about doing stuff for God, it's about communing with God
Yeah.
and then leading out of that communion. And I think we just kind of got it mixed up.
Yep. Leading out of the overflow of
Mhm.
that time with Him. And if we don't set ourselves up for success and have the margin and everything, then we're losing. We're losing.
Yep.
Oh, yeah. Well, I want to thank you so much there was so many nuggets of wisdom in there. And I know that this podcast is going to be so beneficial for leaders of any generation, depending wherever they're at on their walk of leadership. It's gold because whether we're discerning beginning steps, whether we're discerning transitions, we're all in the midst of that. And everything that you shared today can definitely be a huge benefit to any leader. If someone wants to get into contact with you to explore further what you do or how they could maybe be involved with you, how could they get into contact with you, Gary?
Well, the easiest thing is just to Google my name. They'll
You'll
find
pop
lots.
up.
It'll pop up. But I do have a website. You can go to either GaryChupik.com or Elite Mindset Nation because I'm creating a nation of high performers.
Awesome.
So EliteMindsetNation.com or GaryChupik.com. And then on Instagram, I'm Elite Mindset. On Facebook, I mean, just type in my name or Elite Mindset. I'm there. So yeah,
You're there.
not hard to find me, but people can always sign up for a 15-minute discovery call and they can chat about their challenges or how they want to see themselves grow in the future. I'd be happy to respond.
Awesome. Well, I just want to thank you so much for your time today and blessings on you as you continue to walk this amazing journey that God's got you on.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It was a real pleasure.
Yes. Talk to you later.